we wanted to do cool stuff. Really, that's what it comes down to, right? High school was boring. There's a big world out there. We wanted to go see the world, and we wanted to get paid to do the cool stuff. When you put somebody underwater, they can't breathe. All mammals react exactly the same way when you take away their air, right? They go into kind of a panic mindset, and you can't just push harder. I'm going to do this or I'm going to die. I will succeed or I will not exist. And that decision, and truly and honestly making that decision, is what makes the difference. Yesterday, we killed a bad guy with a flying robot from 6,000 miles away, and yet we can't actually do anything around protecting your own children in America. The absolute best thing that they can do is not allow their children on social media, period. Not, well, we have supervised social media. No, period. Do not allow your children on social media. If you want to fight human trafficking, the absolute best thing that you can do is just be a good father. Be a good, trusted father.
It's being a good father, being a good human, and playing an active role in your kids' lives so they're not getting trafficked or they don't cost other families heartache like this situation did here in Madison.
The one piece of advice that I tell parents to give their children is that if anybody ever asks you to send a photo online, especially one that, and it's not somebody that you physically know, and you're not okay posting that publicly for your grandmother and everybody to see, just have a basic policy that you just don't do that. I have many times in my leadership career basically tried to pour from an empty cup, where I was trying to help everybody else out, and I myself, to my own detriment, and basically just burn myself into the ground.
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, and this is your podcast for leadership, inspiration, and impact. And today will be no different. We got Nic McKinley in the building as a former CIA operative, U.S. Air Force Pararescueman, and the founder of DeliverFund, a nonprofit intelligence organization that combats human trafficking by equipping, training, and advising law enforcement. With decades of experience in elite military and intelligence operations, Nic has dedicated his post-government career to disrupting criminal networks and protecting the vulnerable. He brings a mission-driven mindset to everything he does and speaks powerfully on leadership, personal responsibility, and the moral imperative of action. Whether he's advising on national security or building tools to fight trafficking, Nic operates with clarity, courage, and conviction. He's been featured on Forbes, Fox News, and TEDx, and continues to lead the fight against one of the greatest evils of our time. Nic, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Calling from sunny Montana. Well, I hope it's sunny there today.
It is. We're in the middle of what we call a fake summer because it'll be back to 40 and snowing on Sunday. And then we'll slowly transition into real summer before we get into fall, which is basically just winter here. So it's a wonderful place to be, wonderful place to live. I'm very blessed to get to be here.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful country, but yeah, you just deal with the weather that's not so nice in the winter. I'm not too dissimilar. We're in Wisconsin, so we're actually finally hit the spring point where we're 70s, 80s most of the time now. I'm sure we'll get, this morning we woke up, it was 33 degrees, but it warmed up real quick. So
there you go. Yeah,
you can get all four seasons in one day sometimes here.
Yeah, same here. We like the winter up here, though, because I got a world-class ski resort about 15 minutes north of me. So, winter around here is pretty fun.
That absolutely. So, I mean, you got such a diverse background. I want to start with, taking us back to your journey at the beginning before we get into some of the nuanced stuff today. You go from special operations and then ultimately the CIA and now into the nonprofit world. But what started your journey and why'd you want to get into, the military first and then continue on with your career in that respect?
I think the journey for most people who end up in military special ops, we kind of back into the whole patriotism conversation. But I think if you were to go back and talk to 17-year-old Nic McKinley or anybody like me, say, hey, why did you join, insert your special operations unit? It's because we wanted to do cool stuff. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to, right? High school was boring. There's a big world out there. I think most people in the special ops community are coming from rural America, coming from small towns. We wanted to go see the world, and we wanted to get paid to do the coolest stuff there was. And in my case, it was I originally was interested in being a medic in the SEAL teams, but the SEAL teams can't guarantee you a slot as a medic, right? You join the SEAL teams, and then they're going to, if you make it through training, they're going to go ahead and slot you in wherever you want. And so I was on that road, and an Air Force recruiter hit me up and said, hey, have you ever thought about the Air Force? I was like, nah, who wants to be in the chair force, right? Wasn't really interested in flying anything. I wanted to be, a guy on the ground doing the stuff. And I'm just a real, mission oriented person. I was a ski patroller when I was in high school. And, that's just the way that I've always been wired. As an Eagle Scout. So it was just very much like service, go do things, type mentality. And then the Air Force recruiters said the magic words, which was, you probably wouldn't make it anyway, which was brilliant on his part, right? Obviously not the first time he played that card. And I was like, what do you mean I'm not going to make it? He's like, oh, Pararescue has the highest attrition rate in the military. So like, you might be able to go be a SEAL, but you probably wouldn't make it as a PJ. And that's all it took. I was in his office watching the recruiting videos. And at the time, Air Force Pararescue and Combat Control selected together. And Pararescue was the, kind of medical rescue component, which is what it really wanted to do, was medical rescue type missions. And then Combat Control was the, air traffic control and dropping bombs on targets and things like that piece. And so it was, I was guaranteed Halo school, combat dive, right? And so which is the hardest school the United States Army has to offer. I was able to do all of these, cool schools just as being part of to get to be pararescue, right? The SEALs couldn't guarantee me Halo school. Every single pararescueman has to be Halo qualified. The SEALs couldn't guarantee me a special operations combat medic training. Every single pararescueman is special operations combat medic qualified. So that was just like, oh, this is a complete shoe-in. And then the pararescue teams do a lot of work in the mountains. In fact, I think the world record for the highest altitude rescue still is, I believe, still controlled by the Air Force Pararescue team in Alaska. And so because I was really into the mountains, being from Montana, really liked rock climbing, skiing, kind of all things mountain related. And because pararescuemen are probably some of the most highly trained mountain rescue personnel in the world, I was like, all right, this is an absolute shoe-in for me and my personality. And so I blew off the Navy recruiters and signed up for the Air Force.
Amazing. So I always ask special ops people this, whether it's Navy SEAL friends, Green Beret friends, stuff of that nature. What was the hardest part of your training, and what was your mentality to get through it?
I get asked a lot about mentality and mindset. Hardest part of the training is always going to be the water stuff. Anybody who's been through a water-based selection process, which is really only Navy SEALs and Air Force Special Ops, so specifically Pararescue and Combat Control, have the water-based selection. And that's always the hardest and that's why those attrition rates are so much higher than everybody else's. It's not that anybody's better or anything like that, right? I mean, incredible people across all of these different programs, and was incredibly blessed in my career to get to work with them all. But the water-based selection processes just hit a different note with the individual, because if you're a land-based selection process, you can always run a little bit harder, right? You can always push a little bit harder. You can always do just a little bit more because you can breathe. When you put somebody underwater, they can't breathe. All mammals react exactly the same way when you take away their air, right? They go into kind of a panic mindset, and you can't just push harder. In fact, if you just push harder, you're actually more likely to fail. And so you have to keep your mind under control when you get your hands and feet tied behind your back underwater, or you have to execute a task underwater before you can go up and breathe. And what they're looking for is the person who will override that survival instinct and execute that task and not go breathe, as opposed to the person who's going to choose to go breathe. It sounds that simple because it actually is. There's no secret mindset. There's just no secret. You just decide this is what you're going to go do, and then you go do it. It's that simple. And I think anybody who needs any type of voodoo mindset tricks, it's only because they haven't decided that it's this or death, right? It's I'm going to do this or I'm going to die. I will succeed or I will not exist. And that decision, and truly and honestly making that decision is what makes the difference.
Oh, I love that, because it's the same way in anything that you try to take on in life, whether it being an entrepreneur or anything else difficult you're going to do. You're deciding that you're going to see it through or you don't. Mm-hmm. And then failure, and you're just deciding that failure is not an option, because anyone with some sort of backup plan, or 99% versus 100% is that 1% is the difference.
Well, and I don't necessarily know that it's not that failure is not an option, because you can't go through a selection process of that caliber and not fail something. You will fail something. Trust me, your instructors will ensure that even if you are the smartest, best athlete in the world who can hold their breath for 27 minutes, your instructors will ensure that you fail something, because they want to see how you're going to deal with it. And I don't necessarily know that it's that failure isn't an option. It's that when you have the inevitable failure, you fail this test, you fail that test, you are able to rapidly learn from that and apply that lesson to the follow-up evaluation so that you can pass. And I think that ability to rapidly learn, I mean, there's so many people who will say, oh, failure is no option. And then they turn around and keep doing the same failing things over and over and over, right? If you look at, I also have for-profit venture capital-backed tech companies that I've founded and building, and those, in pursuit of product market fit, you end up with these entrepreneurs who will say, well, the company set out to do this, but experience in the market is giving you all the data you need to say that's not going to work. You need to make these pivots. You need to go do something else. But they just continue to do the same failing actions over and over, being like, but I don't want to fail because I built a company to do this thing, and the market's telling me I need to do something else. And then ultimately, they don't make it. So I think that the ability to, as they say in Silicon Valley, the ability to fail fast and learn is one of the most important traits of any leader. Because if you can't notice what's happening, and you can't say, okay, we need to do this in a smarter way, very similar to what we've done at DeliverFund in the fight against human trafficking, you're just going to continue to do things that can't scale. And if you're doing work that can't scale, then it might still be meaningful work, but you're probably not as effective as you think you are.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I should have said quitting is not an option, not failure is not an option, because what you're talking about is remaining agile and pivoting when things don't go the way or to plan, like you mentioned. So thank you for that. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
So you go through being pararescue, and you choose to continue your service, but a much different path going into the CIA. Talk about that transition.
So contrary to popular belief, the Central Intelligence Agency is not a followed documentary of a Jason Bourne series. It is primarily a bunch of very, very bright people who go talk to people for an hour and then spend 4 hours typing up the thing that they talked about. The CIA does do some kind of very cool, what I like to call movie style missions. They're rare and few and far between, but they do those. But the Central Intelligence Agency, if you talk about case officers, a great example. When I was first being recruited to the CIA, it was to be what's called a case management officer, which is basically just somebody who manages a lot of the various case officers in an embassy. And so, I get a phone call. Hey, we're interested in you considering this program. Are you interested? Can't really tell you what it is. The answer is always yes, right? If you get that phone call, the answer is always going to be yes if you're, especially if you're a young man. And so I'd always been curious about the agency. I worked with them a little bit when I was in Pararescue, various operations in Northern Iraq and in the general area. And so I was kind of curious about it because it was crisis mitigation instead of crisis management, right? So in order for a pararescueman to have basically a job and a mission, you might be embedded with an ODA or a SEAL team or CAG or, somebody like that. But ultimately your job is to go to work when things go wrong. And the mission of the Central Intelligence Agency is essentially crisis prevention, right? To keep the butts out of the seats, as we like to say, in the first place, right? To keep operators and whatnot from going overseas. So I'm in this interview for this case management officer position and going through it. And then they ask do you have any questions for me? I was like, yeah, what's the physical fitness standard? And she's like, oh, we don't have a physical fitness standard. We just ask that you can be able to walk, at least a few blocks without breathing too hard. And I was like, what? This is not what I thought. And it's because the folks that I had worked with at the agency were from a different unit. And that unit the unit that I ended up joining actually didn't exist back then. So most people at the Central Intelligence Agency are phenomenal patriots who are really doing their best to try to keep this country safe. And I think if the taxpayer actually understood what it is that they did operationally day in and day out, they would be extremely proud of what they do. But the CIA is not really geared for war zones. So if you got somebody who can't fight, can't shoot, and isn't in very good physical condition, it doesn't matter that they have a degree from MIT. Like I got a degree from Harvard. Who cares? Right? It's what can you actually execute on the battlefield. And so Central Intelligence Agency in 2003 stood up a specialized unit to deal with those, let's just say, battlefield operations, battlefield situations, in conjunction with the Special Operations Command and the Joint Special Operations Command. And so I declined the case officer position. And at that same time, this other unit was like, hey, you're probably better fit over here. And then I got to join that unit shortly after I left the Air Force.
That's cool. And that's good distinction. And it's good to hear from someone that has a deep, intimate knowledge that the vast majority of what we don't know that we would be proud of. Because there is topics out there right now where the CIA is getting, dragged through the mud on, and curious possibly just to bring up one to see if you have anything to say about it. But there's ties, and again, this is all loose ties. I have no intimate knowledge of it, but ties with the CIA and potentially with the Epstein files. There's ties to the CIA and potentially other things that, we wouldn't be so proud of. And I'm not sure you can say anything on it, but you said the vast majority.
I can absolutely say something about it. So how many military special operators do you know? Former, right? Or even current?
Former?
Former
of special operators, probably 24.
Okay. Are they good dudes?
Great dudes.
Great dudes. Awesome. How many former FBI agents do you know? Or Homeland Security?
Less than 5.
Oh, okay.
Less than 5 FBI and Homeland Security.
Are they good men and women? The ones that you know anyway?
Men and women.
Yeah. So when we say things like the CIA and we say things like the FBI and Homeland Security and whatever, what people lose sight of is out of one side of their mouth, they say, oh, I completely support our special ops and all that. And then out of the other side of their mouth, they're saying, well, these men and women at the CIA are up to no good. The two things are mutually exclusive. So great example, the Benghazi situation, the incident. I can't get into how I was connected to that, but I would hear all this like terrible stuff that people were saying in the CIA, but then they were saying these amazing things about these former Navy SEALs and, you know, various people who were killed during that incident. It's like, well, wait a minute, those were CIA people. And so when we say things like the CIA is, you know, potentially connected to the Epstein files, first of all, I would say, yeah, there's lots of conspiracy theorists on YouTube that will have you believe that. Can you show me any concrete evidence? And then the second thing is, what you're saying is that the people that you just said were good men and women are doing this on the side. So they like magically they're not good men and women once they go join a different government agency. The problem here, and this is something that I fault the CIA for, is you got a bunch of boomers in charge at the CIA. And there's a reason that we call them doomers. They don't understand the modern environment as far as technology and media is concerned. And so they have this archaic mindset of like, oh, we don't confirm or deny. And so they don't confirm or deny to their own detriment. And so, like, you know, on one hand, they'll let a guy like me roll cover and say, yeah, I was at the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, they won't let me tell about every year I was there. On paper, they're only allowing me to talk about 3 years of it. I was actually there longer, but so they'll do those things, but then they won't turn around and actually say, yeah, like, you know, this is dumb. Like this doesn't make sense. And a lot of it is just logical, right? Why would the Central Intelligence Agency need to be involved with Epstein? Now, was there an intelligence agency involved? I don't have concrete proof of that, but that's the most logical explanation. Probably the Russians, possibly the Israelis, even though that doesn't really make as much sense. Possibly the French. So my top two, like which intelligence agencies were running Epstein, I think was probably either the French or the Russians, because they do things like that all the time. What would the Central Intelligence Agency have to gain by being involved in something like that? Right? Does that make sense?
Power over powerful people has been the word on the street.
But they already have power over powerful people. So if they want to get power over Bill Gates, they just get, hey, oh, by the way, you're up for audits. You're under investigation for this. You're under investigation for that. I mean, the U.S. government can bring pretty much anybody they want to their knees at any time if they're a U.S. citizen. So why would they need to do that? Right.
Great insight.
Yeah. So the logic just isn't there. Plus, you know, you always hear those things from people who've never actually worked inside.
And that's why I ask the people inside. I love asking people inside because I want everyone to hear this. Because like what you stated about the boomers in charge, I've stated this for a long time about not CIA even in general, but like the government in general. Like, if you just tell us the truth, there would be no conspiracies.
Totally. Well, there's always going to be conspiracies because, you know, crazy people live on the internet. But yes, I get your point. I think if you look at what's going on with like Doge and things like that right now, I mean, are they doing everything perfect? Obviously not. But they're super transparent about what they're doing. Right? Yep. They're talking about what it is that they're doing. And people also have to imagine, so you're a financial firm. How many employees did you have when you sold it?
250.
250 employees. So decent size financial firm. Right. So you have 250 employees. My old supervisor in the Air Force used to be he was the highest enlisted man in the United States military. He was the first special operator to end up in what's called the CSAC position, which is where he is an enlisted man working directly for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, right? He's a special advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Air Force Pararescueman, highest ranking enlisted special operator in the history of the U.S. government. First one to make it to that position. He had over 2 million people underneath him.
Wow.
So obviously doesn't have 2 million direct reports, but that's
Correct.
the scope here. And that is just within the armed services. That doesn't include DoD civilians and all that stuff. It's just within the armed services. So when we look at the government writ large, we're talking about the largest government in the history of the world. What are the chances that something's going to go wrong? What are the chances that the bureaucracy is going to have some problems, right? And that is the biggest problem with our government, is everybody thinks that everybody at the government is a, Ivy League educated, world-class athlete who's doing this really cool stuff. No, most people at the government are the people who got hired because they were the ones who applied for the job. That's the major majority of your government and the government bloat that we've seen. So if you start adding those kinds of people, you start adding this level of complexity. Again, largest government the world's ever seen, most powerful military, economic, and intelligence might the world has ever seen. You're obviously going to have this massive bureaucracy that builds up among it, and the bureaucracy is hungry, and the bureaucracy must be fed. And what does it feed on? It feeds on bureaucracy. It feeds on paperwork. It feeds on protectionism. And so there's always going to be things that go wrong. There's always going to be rogue actors. I mean, I can tell stories of rogue, personnel from the CIA, from JSOC, from SOCOM, doing things that would not make the country proud. But they were ultimately caught. Most of them that I know of were prosecuted and are currently in prison for those things. So just because a couple of people, one person or a couple of people, or even a couple of dozen people are up to no good does not mean that the entire organization is up to no good.
Yeah. No, that's really good feedback. So you ultimately leave the CIA and you become, go on your path of becoming an entrepreneur and start this not-for-profit. I'm curious, was it what you saw in the CIA or potentially even your military experience, or was there some other impetus that caused you to go down the path of fighting this awful thing of child trafficking, human trafficking?
It was largely what I saw, not what I saw at the CIA, but what I realized at the CIA. So my whole career up to, to the point of getting involved in the human trafficking fight and getting involved in tech entrepreneurship was primarily focused around counterterrorism, right? The whole thing. And so I always just assumed that somewhere there was a version of me dealing with the human trafficking issue, right? I mean, that was just a naivete on my part. And wasn't until I was in actually the most dangerous city in the world in southern Afghanistan, leading a very small team of people, who, were acting on your behalf as a taxpayer, primarily through the use of kinetic energy. And so we're doing this work, and I've got a Joint Special Operations Command counterpart, and he's the primary collector, and managed to basically, obviously can't get too much into the details, but we ended up stumbling upon what I like to call smoking gun intel. And it was a child trafficker that was moving children, primarily boys, across the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. And so, all right, find this information on this human trafficker. We're the first ones to come across this. And so the case officer is going to go write this information up and then, get it to the right person. And the intelligence community doesn't work like the movies, right? I mean, information doesn't, you don't have one analyst who just happens to know everything and report to the president and the director, in the back of an SUV like you see on the movies. It's more like the banking system where you've got account numbers and routing numbers that make sure that intelligence make it to the right person, right? Make it to the right desk. And so as we were looking for this human trafficking, child exploitation thing, we couldn't find any of these codes to route the information in the right place. Long story short, after a couple of weeks and then a couple of months, we figured out that it's because it didn't exist, right? There's no place to put human trafficking information in the federal government at that level. And that's because it's not a presidential mandate. And again, contrary to the movies, people at the CIA don't just get to do whatever they want. They take orders, and my unit, orders primarily came from the executive branch. But by and large, they've got an assignment. They've got something they're supposed to go figure out. And those are the things that they're trying to figure out or facilitate figuring out. And there just was nobody who was dealing with the human trafficking issue. And that got me curious. And I've been curious about it for a while, but I really started diving into the books, read over 30 books on the human trafficking issue, which is, I think, something that kind of sets me apart a little bit in this space. Is I'm just a nerd. I mean, when it comes to, the seminal strategy on the disruption of human trafficking is called 10 points of data, or 10 points of disruption. I'm the one who wrote the academic paper, complete with the Markov chain models, in why that works and how it will work. So I am, people think because of all the gun work in my history that I'm kind of, a gun monkey, but I'm the biggest nerd you'll meet. So,
I love it. It's the duality of being a gun monkey and also being a nerd.
Yeah. Right. So I just started diving into the books and the data, and ultimately what I came to the conclusion of and figured out, obviously not the first person to figure out, I was just figuring it out for myself, was that dollar for dollar largest human trafficking market is the United States of America. When it comes to human trafficking in America, it's not a border issue. Are there traffickers coming across the border and children being trafficked across the border? Yes, but it's pretty rare. DOJ's own data shows that 86% of the victims in their human trafficking cases are U.S. citizens, primarily American preteen girls, but there's also some young boys in there as well. The major majority of human traffickers, and we're talking north of 75% of the human traffickers, are U.S. citizens, and almost, on the commercial sex trafficking side and on labor trafficking, over 98% of the customers are U.S. citizens. So this is not an over there problem. It's an over here problem. And that's when I just kind of had this epiphany of like, well, wait a minute. Like, yesterday we killed a bad guy with a flying robot from 6,000 miles away. And yet we can't actually do anything around protecting our own children in America. And then I started diving deeper into how the human trafficking market works, understand and know a lot about illicit commodity markets from my counterterrorism experience. And so figured out, at the end of the day, what I figured out was that law enforcement needed better tools and better analytics, very similar to what we had in the fight and probably still do have in the fight against terrorism. And that was a problem that I could solve. And so that's what I set out to solve.
So you said something interesting, because it hasn't been a mandate. I mean, this is such an evil, ugly world in the sex trafficking, human trafficking thing. Like, why hasn't it been a mandate?
I think it's
solve the problem.
I think it's pretty simple, and my answer to this is a little cynical. I understand that, but still my answer. It's because kids don't vote. It's that simple. It's that simple. You think about, why did we get the war on drugs? How's that going, by the way? Why did we get the war on drugs in the 80s? Well, it's because you had a bunch of middle-class white girls and boys start dying from drugs. And their parents had a voice, and their parents started political pressure. Bam, we get the DEA, we get the war on drugs. Trafficked children don't have a voice. Most of the time, their parents are not people of means and influence who have a voice. And so if all of the sudden, like if you look at like the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue is a great parallel, where I sit in Montana, it's one of the most dangerous states in the country to be a Native woman. The murder rates for Native women to the rest of the population is like 30 to 1. I mean, it's ridiculous. So if you had middle class white girls going missing at the same rate you have Native women going missing, it would be a national emergency. But because you're talking about a population that really doesn't have much of a voice, people are barely talking about it. And I think that's where we are with the human trafficking issue. And the second reason why, and again, sinister and cynical, but it's true, is because the social media companies are the primary facilitators of human trafficking. And I don't mean that in that they are purposely doing this, but when you look at trafficking cases, almost every trafficking case in America originates online. It originates with a direct message from a human trafficker or some type of child exploiter to a child on the internet. That's how almost every single one starts. And the social media companies have responsibility for that. And they're paying their lobbyists to then make sure that Congress doesn't pass any meaningful legislation which holds them accountable for that. And I don't actually fault the social media companies as much as I do our politicians for not doing the right thing. You can't blame a for-profit business for, you can blame them, but you can understand why a for-profit business would be trying to limit their liability and the regulation that's put on them. And especially after working in the federal government for 17 and a half years, I think this federal government should be as small as it should, and we should have as little regulation as possible. That said, there are things that need to be regulated, and this is one of them. So that's ultimately why we don't have more work being done at the federal level and at the state and local level on the human trafficking fight. There's no funding.
That's a really good answer. What it makes me think of is, so you mentioned it's mostly preteen girls, but segment that down further. Who exactly is it? Because I think you're going to get a lot of, like, I'm a father of 3 girls and a boy. 2 of my girls are preteen, 1 is early teens. Like, you're going to have listeners going, well, I have little girls. Who are they? What are they looking for? What should these parents be looking for?
It's not that the parents can actually be looking for anything, because the parents don't know this is happening. And this is the crux of the problem when it comes to the modern human trafficking fight. And this is exactly why at DeliverFund, we fight it the way that we do. And just to kind of, I'll get your answer here in a second, but this is going to be a long one. So I get asked a lot, between military special ops and a kinetic unit central intelligence agency. I did 30 combat deployments, 30. And, I got some injuries and traumatic brain injury and stuff like that from it, but absolute grace of God, I've got all my fingers and toes, and am not near as bad as a lot of my brothers are. Why? Well, because we were really good at fighting war. And so people think about the fight against human trafficking. They think Liam Neeson. They think, oh, we're going to go kick doors and rescue kids. Well, if you're doing that in America and you don't have a badge and a gun, you're committing felonies, because you cannot take possession of a child unless you have a court order or you are right. You are the official guardian of that child. Like, you can't do that. So anytime I hear somebody who's like, oh, especially people who are just trying to scratch their action guy itch and are like, oh, they never actually did any of that kind of stuff, but now they feel bad about it. And so now they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to go in and go rescue a child from a hotel room. It's like, 1, you're committing felonies. 2, you very clearly don't know what you're doing. And 3, you're not actually understanding the problem, because this is a problem of scale. And so when I say a problem of scale, what I mean is the best data we have comes from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They found that between 2010 and 2015, they had an 846% increase in suspected child trafficking cases. Now, what happened between 2010 and 2015? Mass adoption of smart, which are basically just broadband connected microcomputers that are in everybody's pocket. So in my day, pre-internet, when I was a child, parents could just keep their kids away from the creepy guys, right? From the predators, from the pedophiles, from the traffickers. Now, and those predators could only get their hands on the children that they could get physical access to. Now, because of the internet, every predator has access to every other child on the planet who has access to the internet. Doesn't even have to be through a smartphone. It can be through an Xbox or a PlayStation. We've had trafficking cases originate off of basically young boys being manipulated through these gaming consoles by older, primarily men, who would groom them over a period of weeks to months. And that's why I say it's very hard for a parent to actually see something, because what that parent sees is them talking to their buddy on an Xbox, but they don't realize that's actually just the beginning of the grooming process. So we don't at DeliverFund not go, kick doors and rescue kids because we don't know what we're doing. I mean, I know there's nonprofits that claim that they do that. Like I've forgotten more about kicking doors than they would ever even know. We don't do that because that doesn't work. We focus on that technology piece, which is to help law enforcement, prosecutors, and then the public be able to detect human trafficking so that we can fight it at scale. So if I was to go out and work directly with the law enforcement department and say, hey, I'm going to help you with this human trafficking operation on the kinetic side of it, on the arresting side of it, well, I'm not law enforcement, so I'm probably going to screw it up. Because law enforcement has a really hard job that I don't obviously understand at the constitutional level the way that they do. So I'll end up violating somebody's civil liberties probably. But we don't not, and even if we went to go do that, that's just one department we can help. Right now, as you and I have this conversation, thanks to technology, we have over 7,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States who have direct access to our data for free. And it's free thanks to the generosity of donors. And those are house-built solutions that our engineers are building. So why go just help one law enforcement department when for actually the same price, we can help 7,000 simultaneously? Wow. So now we're connecting human traffickers and human trafficking cases across the country because they're in social media. So the best way for parents to learn kind of what to look for would actually be to go to deliverfund.org and go to the training side and take our Human Trafficking 101 course and get to see, it's an hour-long course. So we couldn't really go through that right here on this podcast, but it actually breaks down all of the different things that they need to do in order to intervene in the trafficking cycle if they get the opportunity. But it's important to understand that many times they're not going to get the opportunity because they're going to think, again, that their child is just talking to somebody on Xbox. They're just talking to somebody on TikTok or something like that. So what I tell parents is the absolute best thing that they can do is not allow their children on social media, period. Not, well, we have supervised social media, and like, no. Period. Do not allow your children on social media. My children are young. I mean, grade school. And they already know that they will get a phone when they get a driver's license. And they will get social media when they turn 18 and they can sign up for their own accounts. Not before.
I did the same thing. Now I caved on the phone thing because we got 4 kids and the dance schedule we caved on.
Sure.
That being said, the social media, they already know
that rule.
Yeah. They already know they're not having access to social media until they're 18. And they understand. I told them, and I didn't have to get into the sex trafficking thing. It was about how it interrupts brain pattern and growth, and it's just not good for them. So, no, that's really, really good and really good information. So everyone, what was the website again so they can go take that course?
It's DeliverFund.org, and you just click on the training tab. And if you're law enforcement listening to this, we also have a law enforcement specific training course that's absolutely free to you. All you've got to do is sign up, and we'll send you a code to the law enforcement specific one, which contains some information that we don't release to the public. If you're law enforcement and you want access to our data, just send us a note through our website and we'll verify that you're law enforcement and get you access to our data and get you access to the tools. But one thing that parents can do, we also have an app called HT Safeguard, and it's in the App Store. And what you can do is all human trafficking these days, basically, because it originates online, it all also happens online. So most human trafficking happens with advertisements for trafficking victims that are posted on the front-facing internet. There's about 30 different websites. Most of them are hosted overseas. What we do is we harvest that data. We've got 3 supercomputers and a brilliant engineering team. So we harvest that data and we make that data available at a massive scale to law enforcement. And our AI will actually crawl through that data to help law enforcement find connections they didn't know existed and to help them find the information that they're looking for so they can filter it down into information that's relevant to their case and their jurisdiction. However, in a very limited way, we've made that data available to the public through our app. So if you download the HT Safeguard app, you sign up for an account, you can actually screen phone numbers and email addresses for connections to potential human trafficking and connections to commercial sex advertisements. And so if you have a young girl who, I don't know, is chatting with somebody on Instagram or TikTok, Snapchat, whatever they're using, and that person then gives them a phone number and says, hey, hit me up, text me, hit me up on Signal, WhatsApp, whatever the platform is, they can run that phone number through that data, through our app. And if it comes back with a positive connection, we're not saying that person's a human trafficker, but we are saying that phone number has been connected to a commercial sex advertisement. That's a big red flag that might make you want to pay attention to who you're communicating with. So that's a great example of the types of technologies that we're providing, because it's not about, helping you or helping this parent over here or that one over there. It's about helping all of them simultaneously. And there is no silver bullet for this issue. That doesn't exist. So it's a combination of trying to train the public through our social media accounts, plus working with law enforcement, plus building this app, plus all of these other technologies that we're rolling out to be able to help find human trafficking victims and human traffickers better, faster, and cheaper so that we can bring them to justice at scale.
Great. So I asked you, the original question was about who are they looking for? Is there certain characteristics?
Any vulnerable child. We have had human trafficking cases where it was young boys, and dad was actually a cybersecurity professional, very high up in a very large company, and so was doing all the right things because the guy knew what he was doing, and yet his son was manipulated through and ultimately trafficked, and the whole conversation started on an Xbox. We had a case in California with a family with a very recognizable last name, and their daughter was going to an $80,000 a year private school. And she ended up being trafficked out of that school, all the way down to obviously the child who's under supervised because, dad's not in the picture and their mom's working 2 jobs to make ends meet. So what they're looking for are vulnerable children. All children are vulnerable at some point. The one piece of advice I can give actually applies to both parents, but primarily to fathers, which is if you want to fight human trafficking, the absolute best thing that you can do is just be a good father. Be a good, trusted father. And that in itself reduces your child's risk of being trafficked significantly.
Oh, that's really good. I've had the blessing to talk to other experts like yourself, and one of the things that they've said as well is they look for fathers that aren't a threat, meaning that they're either not there or they're not physically intimidating enough to pose a threat.
I would disagree with that. I've heard the physical intimidation thing, and that's just not true. They look for fathers who are checked out. And we have cases. So we do more human trafficking cases than any nonprofit on the planet, and have more human trafficking data again than any nonprofit on the planet, which is not as much of a feather in our cap as it is an indictment of the system, because you would sure think that governments would have more than we do. And when we look across the cases, the fatherlessness, be it father's not in the picture or the father's checked out, is something that we see consistently. But I mean, we can tell you stories of fathers who were, semi-pro bodybuilders, special operators, all types of different things that ended up with daughters who got in, who ended up in a bad situation. And we can tell you fathers, we can tell you about the doughy dad bod, who, was, maybe not necessarily his best self, but he was a phenomenal father. And daughters who came to that doughy dad bod and said, "Hey, there's something wrong here. I've made a mistake. I sent a picture I regret," or whatever. And those fathers, while being the least physically intimidating people you could possibly imagine, were more importantly not intimidating to their daughters, and their daughters felt safe enough to be able to approach them. And so I think as men, we like to think that, but I see it all the time, especially in a lot of the kind of circles that I end up running in, where these dads who are like, "Oh, I'm going to protect my family." It's like, man, you haven't closed with a human since you were in high school. And sorry, your jiu-jitsu training on the weekend ain't the same as the person with tattoos on his face who got out of prison 3 days ago, who killed 3 people in prison, and now is coming up against you. Like, you're not even a speed bump for this guy. And so again, being a good man, being a good father, that is the number one thing that you can do. It's not physical fitness. It's not how many guns you own. I mean, most people own a lot of guns, can't shoot them anyway. It's none of that. It's just being a good father. And being a good father usually means that your daughter, when she makes a mistake, and she will come to you and ask for advice on how to deal with it. And then the thing that I'll add to that is, because now everybody's probably wondering, well, what do I do if my daughter does come to me? You become the squeaky wheel. You get everybody involved. You call your county sheriff, you call your city police, you call the FBI IC3 office, you file reports with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. You call your attorney general, you call every single person that you can, and you make sure everybody knows about it. And you make sure that people start moving. And if you hear law enforcement say, "Oh, there's nothing I can do about that," you move to the next law enforcement department. But you just you become the squeaky wheel, because unfortunately, I think most people in America, back to where we started, right, with the government just communicates with its constituency terribly. They get their education on how the government works through Hollywood. And they think that you call one FBI agent and suddenly everybody's on alert. Oh no. I mean, you'll have FBI agents who work in the same office and have cubicles next to each other, and they don't even know what each other are doing. And it's not because of some type of super secret compartmentalization. It's just because they're all overwhelmed and busy. And so if you're a parent and you end up with your child being targeted for exploitation, you just don't stop until somebody somewhere takes action.
Yeah, and that's such great advice.
An authority. I mean, somebody with constitutional authority, which usually comes in the shape of a badge and a gun and a set of handcuffs, right? Or prosecutorial authority, and until they actually open an investigation and they start moving.
Yeah, we just had a situation in Madison a few months back where there was a school shooting, and the daughter came out right away, had been communicating with a dude in California. And just this week, the father was arrested. So not all the details are out yet, all that different stuff. But it was a tragic situation, much like any school situation and shooting. And it wasn't a trafficking situation, but there was some sort of grooming, some sort of psychological warfare on this person through communicating online with a 40 or 50-year-old adult in California. And father is now being arrested. We don't know exactly why or how he played a role in this, whether it was just the ownership of the gun or if he was part of this situation somehow, some way. But we'll get those details soon. But it's not just the trafficking situation. It's being a good father, being a good human, and playing an active role in your kids' lives so they're not getting trafficked or they don't cost other families heartache like this situation did here in Madison.
I get the calls constantly. The people that you don't call if your daughter's in a trafficking situation is us at DeliverFund. We work with law enforcement, and we, like, just from a regulatory perspective, we cannot work with you as a parent. If what you do is you work with law enforcement and you say, hey, if you need help with this, with my daughter's case, you call DeliverFund and they will help you, because we have analysts who, do this work. We have analysts actually embedded in human trafficking task forces. So this isn't something where we just kind of come in and come out every once in a while. We're there. We are a resource for over 7,000 law enforcement agencies, 24/7, 365. So that's who you don't call. But it's just understanding that what happens online, like you said, it's incremental. It starts with just this little thing and that little thing and that little thing. And we've actually seen a increase in the targeting of teenage boys by what appear to be good looking teenage girls online, at that, which ultimately is, men on the other side of that teenage girl profile that are causing those kids to make bad decisions. The one piece of advice that I tell parents to give their children is that if anybody ever asks you to send a photo online, especially one that, and it's not somebody that you physically know, and you're not okay posting that publicly for your grandmother and everybody to see, just have a basic policy that you just don't do that. And if it's boyfriend, girlfriend, then they should just have a policy between each other that they just don't send nude photos and things like that online, because one, they live forever, but two, that's one of the primary targeting mechanisms of traffickers and child exploiters today, is to get a child to send a photo that they regret, and then they use that photo as the handle to control them. And so just to know, don't do that. Kids are going to make mistakes.
Yep.
And when they do, that's where being a good dad comes in, right? That's where being a good mom comes in, is because now the child will come to you and say, hey, I've made a mistake. I've really screwed up and I need help dealing with this. And if that happens, do not get angry with your child. The worst thing that you can do. The thing that you do is say, okay, you understand there's going to be consequences for this, and I don't control those consequences because you put something on the internet. Let's see what we can do to mitigate the damage and to make sure that this doesn't affect your life. And then you go to war with the system to make sure that photo gets taken down and everybody gets alerted and there's an investigation.
Yeah. So I want to switch topics real quick, going back to your CIA days, and you may or may not be able to speak to this, but it ties together because it recently came out, and it's mind-boggling that we have the ability to do remote viewing. And I just think about that from that perspective, as like how I'm sure there's a skill set and only a few people that can do it, that have that skill set, if that's true, and how to catch bad guys utilizing that type of skill set. I just was I was thinking about that with your background, and if you could speak to that at all.
So until I find somebody who can actually do the remote viewing, show me that they can do the remote viewing, it's all conspiracy theories on YouTube. I call complete BS. So like, let's break this down logically. You're telling me that the agency had this ability to do remote viewing this entire time, that we spent 10 years trying to find bin Laden, at the cost of significant blood and treasure. So the people who are like, oh, well, the agency has the ability to do remote viewing. When people say that, they don't realize how insanely insulting that is to the people who provide the blanket of freedom that they sleep under. Because I don't have a lot of friends anymore because they're all dead. And the reason they're dead is because they were trying to figure out what was going on when we had threats of, certain terrorist organizations that were going to blow up car bombs in LA rush hour traffic. And we had terrorist organizations that were going to throw hand grenades into classrooms. We prevented all that stuff. And so to say that, one of the first casualties of the war on terror was a pararescueman named Jason Cunningham. They were, part of a larger mission trying to find bin Laden. So to think that like, oh, we have these remote viewing capabilities and yet we're willing to just, throw my brothers to the meat grinder, like that's just not true. I mean, when a guy from my unit got into a shooting in Pakistan, I watched the federal government spend billions of dollars to get him back, and they didn't have to, right? I mean, we know what we signed up for. We know that, if we get caught, the government has the right to be like, never heard of him. And instead they spent billions of dollars to get him back, and they didn't need to do that. So if we just look at that logically, like there's all these conspiracy theories rolling around the internet, and I just it's just a hard disagree, because you're not going to find anybody who was actually in there, actually doing the work on the ground, who's going to agree with that and say, wait a minute, so you're telling me we had the ability to know where bin Laden was the whole time, and yet
didn't do it.
Yeah, and we didn't use that. We had the ability to know exactly where Iran's nuclear stuff was. We had the ability to know all this stuff, but we didn't do it. And instead, what we did was we sent these good men and women to die. Right? I mean, it just fails the basic logic test.
Fails the logic test. Yep. So I thought that was an actual report that came out or was declassified that stated that.
No, was the agency in, especially the 60s and 70s, were they trying everything? Were they throwing LSD at things to see like, hey, can we get people's minds to work differently, to maybe control, foreign spies and things? Were they, I mean, we're not saying that they didn't do anything that was unethical. They weren't running experiments that's unethical. I mean, I've there's plenty of declassified reports that show that the CIA has spent millions, if not billions of dollars, trying everything. Like, oh, this person says they're a psychic. Well, let's see if that's true. But at the end of the day, you've got because let's face it, you're looking for every single possible edge that you can get over the enemy. I mean, there were times when I was just me and one other guy, a stone's throw from the Fatah. I'll let you pick which side of the border. And I mean, we might have been two extremely highly trained people, but, we had a Glock and a cell phone. And so we come up against, 30, 40 fighters and we're done. We're going to run out of ammo in, with less than a minute. And so the things that are done in order to keep this country safe, I just think the American public has absolutely no idea how often this happens. I mean, we're not talking about like, well, every month there's a large threat. No, we're talking about every single day. There are multiple threats coming from multiple places against this country. And that's just on the physical side. That doesn't get into what happens every second on the cyber side. So for us as a country, and this is one of the things I think the government just frustrates me so much, that they don't do a better job of communicating this, to be like, there are incredibly brave men and women right now who haven't seen their family in 10 months and are sick and lost, 15 pounds because of the water that they have to drink because they have no other choice, and the food they have to eat because they have no other choice, who are, working 18, 20-hour days trying to prevent something from happening to our families here, to my family here. And we owe them a debt of gratitude as much as to say that, well, maybe if we are supporting them and we're supporting their mission, maybe we should assume that they're not doing these sinister things behind curtains and, smoke-filled rooms. And instead, they're actually just out there trying to do their best to try to keep Homeland safe. And when some things fall through the cracks, like it does with 9/11 or the Boston bomber or something like that, they live with the weight of knowing that they failed. One of my last missions was a terrorist leader. We never got him, and he is currently. It won't be hard for you to draw some lines here. He's currently the number 2 of a country that we recently lost, that I promise you, we are going to have another terrorist attack from that country. And that is not for the failure of the brave men and women that are out there doing the work. That's for the failure of our politicians. And so ultimately, the only things I have ever seen in, again, 17 years of government service at what are some pretty stinking high levels, the only sinister things I ever saw were from elected officials or from politicians. I mean, people forget President Obama extrajudicially killed 2 U.S. citizens, one of which was a minor. First president since Lincoln to do that. Drone strikes, right? People forget that. That was not, some guy like me on the ground with a rifle. That was, that was an elected politician who did that.
From the top.
So,
yeah.
So whether it's your elected officials, like you hear any weird, dark, smoky room conspiracy theories and they involve elected officials getting together and doing things. You got my attention, because that probably is true. But to think that these these organizations that are trying to keep our country safe, they don't have time to be developing these conspiracy theories. They're just trying to survive to tomorrow.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate your perspective on that. That was really good. I want to wrap up with a leadership question. What does it mean to lead ethically and courageously, even when no one's watching? What does it mean to you?
That's a great question. That might actually be one of the better ways to phrase a leadership question that I've ever been asked. Yeah, that's awesome. So to me, it means that you have a process. And if you don't have a process, then you're not actually doing it. And what I mean by that is so take me as an example. I am a Bible believing Christian. So the Bible is the foundational text for which I use to make decisions. But I obviously can't roll through the whole, all 66 books on every single decision that I'm trying to make. So I came up with what I call my leadership algorithm. I'm a big math nerd. I like math. It makes a lot of sense. It's always logical, and it follows an order. And so for me, I've got this leadership algorithm that helps me to be able to make decisions, and more importantly, helps me to be able to diagnose when things go wrong. Because if you're a leader and something goes wrong, it is always your fault. Might only be a little bit your fault, but you always bear fault. So it helps me be able to reverse that algorithm to be able to diagnose what went wrong. And so for me, it's just a 4-step process. Because when people talk about leadership, they'll talk about the philosophies and theories of leadership, like, oh, I'm a servant leader. Okay, what does that mean? Right? It's got to be an actual process that you follow. So anybody who's trying to lead morally and ethically and with integrity, which means they're doing the right thing when no one is watching, has to have a process in order to hold themselves accountable before they can ever hold their team accountable. And for me, it's real simple. First and foremost, I have to establish and cultivate a culture of trust. And that means that I have to trust myself and my team has to trust me. Second, I have to maintain standards, discipline, and mission focus. And that means that I have to write down what my standards and discipline are, or my standards are and my mission is. And I have to then hold myself accountable to those standards before I can hold my team accountable to those standards. Third is I have to properly manage talent and egos, right? We all have talent. We all have an ego. The question is it a personal ego or is it a collective ego? What we do at DeliverFund, we are the best in the world at fighting commercial sex trafficking in the United States of America. That is a statement of fact. That is not because I am the best, right? In fact, I would say at this point, I probably just get in the way. It's because this team and the way that all the people who helped through all the years are that good at it and that world class at it because they've been singularly focused on that for a decade, right? So we manage the talent, right butts in the right seat. Am I the right person for this? Or do I need to actually say, you know what, as a leader, I'm actually not the best one to make this decision. I have somebody else in my team who's better. So I'm going to punt it over to them because they're going to do a better job. And so we properly manage our own talent and ego. And then the fourth thing that we do is we serve. And I think this is where we get things wrong a lot, in that we have to serve ourselves as much as we serve our team. I am very much somebody who has a servant's heart, going all the way back to, early days of, being a Boy Scout and an Eagle Scout and all that. And so I have many times in my leadership career basically tried to pour from an empty cup, where I was trying to help everybody else out, and I myself, to my own detriment, and basically just burn myself into the ground. Well, that's not good for my team, because my team needs me to be sharp. They need me to be on point. And if I'm constantly giving up myself to the point where I never replenish, then I can't be who they need me to be. And so by following those 4 steps, that's how I do that. And then when I make a mistake, which happens routinely, and a leadership decision that I wish I would have done differently in hindsight, I can then reverse that and say, okay, where did I mess up, so I can make sure that I don't do this again.
So good. I hope everyone replays that a couple different times. That was well said. Man, this has been such a great conversation. How can our audience support you?
Thank you. The best way to support us is go to deliverfund.org/donate, and please help us keep these servers running, help us keep our intelligence analysts focused on this issue. This is what they do all day, every day, and we don't take government money. People are now starting to see why. And we are 100% privately donor funded. So that's the best way that they can support us. If you have a business and you have KYC, AML issues, if you run any type of technology platform that has kids on it, 100%, you've got human traffickers that are trying to find their way in there if they're not already in there. One of my for-profit companies, 10 Point Data, we actually have the data and the AI that can help you find bad guys and kick them out of your platforms. And so on one side, I would say, do business with us. And on the other side, I would say, please, if you've got a philanthropic budget, please consider helping us to keep this program running.
I love it. You guys heard the man, and we owe him a deep debt of gratitude for his service to our country, and is continuing to serve through the nonprofit. So not only share this episode far and wide, but please go and donate and support Nic and his amazing cause. Such an ugly, difficult topic. As you heard the stats that he's talking about, 98% of the human trafficking right here in the U.S. And it's really disheartening, because there wouldn't be human trafficking without consumer, for the end consumer for human trafficking. And that's something that we got to weigh heavily on our hearts. It's not just the red dots that you can pull up in your neighborhood. There's a lot of people out there that haven't been caught yet. And that's what Nic and his team are fighting for, is our kids, which is our future. So Nic, thank you so much for your time, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me and helping to spread the word. Greatly appreciate you.
Very welcome. Spartans, you know what to do. Share this episode far and wide. Remember that good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.
This is Sparta!